Hello and welcome to the day 3 of Advanced Audit and Assurance Practice to Pass session for June 2019 exams being organized by ACCA Pakistan. I am Kashif Kamran, your tutor. Now, just before proceeding towards the day 3 agenda, I would first like to recap the day 2 learnings. Now, yesterday on the day 2, we were focusing on procedures and evidence. And just to make a quick recap of the key learnings we had from the day 2 yesterday, when we were identifying how to write a good procedure. Now, in terms of the good procedure, we identified yesterday that a good procedure should be adaptive to the case study. And the second more important thing of writing a good procedure was that a good procedure should have an action, a good procedure should have a source, and a good procedure should have a purpose. We read in the session yesterday the examiner technique article on audit procedure, which was a wonderful resource for students to read and to understand how they can write a good procedure in the advanced audit and assurance exam. I even mentioned in the session yesterday the marking scheme for procedures. And then towards the end of the session yesterday, we focused on a typical question which comes on evidence and how to write evidence and how to write methods in terms of the marking scheme in an exam question. I hope you have gone through the day 2 session effectively, and this brings us to the start of the day 3 today. Now, the day 3 today of the Advanced Audit and Assurance Practice to Pass session, focused on June 2019 exams, is all about ethical, professional, and quality control issues. Yet another core area of the syllabus and a very, very important area of the syllabus. During the course of the next 3 hours, you will realize how important this area is in a 100 marks paper from again the examiner article and the examiner approach. And you will also realize in the next 3 hours the mistakes students do when they attempt a question on ethical, professional, and quality control issues. Now, again, on the right hand side of your screen, you can see the previous webinars, March 18, June 18, September 18, December 18, and March 19. In each of these webinars, the same topic has been focused because this is a core syllabus area. And in each of the previous webinars, I have practiced different questions so that you have ample resources available to practice this topic. Now, in the session today, I have purposely chosen yet another 2 different questions. And this time, in the session today, I will be focusing on June 2018, question number 3, and I will be focusing on December 17, question number 3B. Then you have 2 questions for your home assignment, which is December 15, question 4, and December 14, question 5A. The questions I will be doing in the sessions, you will be having my drafted answers as well. So you can reconcile your answer with my drafted answers. But June 18 and December 17 will be the questions I will be demonstrating in the session today so that you have a better understanding of the mistakes the student do in this topic. Okay, now starting on with the proceedings of this day 3 on ethical, professional, and quality control issues. Just like the day 1 and just like the day 2, there is a specific examiner guidance on ethical, professional, and quality control issue. You can see the links of the 2 articles which are written by the examiner, and these 2 articles are very important because these 2 articles will set the tone of how you understand this topic from an examination point of view. If you see on the screen, you will see this first article link here, which is the examiner article on exam techniques, ethics, how you should be writing an ethics answer in AAA paper. This article does not cover professional and quality control issues. This article only covers ethics. So how you can be good on drafting an ethics answer, what you should be doing and what you should not be doing, has been very clearly mentioned in the Examiner Technique article part 1. Then there is another article written by the examining team which focuses on quality control. And this article down here will help you explore the area of quality control and what basically quality control is when it comes to the AAA paper and what sort of issues student might face in a question on quality control. The examiner has given complete illustrative guidance on that in this article. So there is plenty of support available. It's all about you utilize this support and you have organized these supports with you and you are using them towards your June 2019 exams. Even discussing that on the previous 2 days, a lot of time student even does not have knowledge of these articles. They have no idea that the examiner has published these articles, even though ACCA try to disseminate this message to all the student fraternity about the updates through different means. So, all of you in the live session today, uh, did you have an idea that the examiner has written an exam technique article on ethics, which will be just like the articles we did on the day 1 on risk and the day 2 on procedures? Okay, that's wonderful. If some of you have the idea that the examiner did had an article on this, and did you realize on the day 1 and day 2 that these examiner articles are so important? On the day 1 we did the risk article, and on the day 2 we did the article on procedure. Did you realize how important these articles are? So today we are doing yet another article, because this article will tell us how we can be good on ethics and we can write a good answer on ethics. So I hope you make a priority of downloading these 5 examiner articles, which are techniques article. And these technique articles, part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, and part 5, which is basically the top 5 articles currently on the AAA web area of the ACCA website. And they're really, really good articles. Okay, let's start on with the first focus area, which is ethical issues. Now, if I just take on my Word file as I do on a day-to-day basis, and this time on your screen you can see the same Word file, but today we are focusing on day 3. Now, just to start on our focus on day 3, where we are focusing on a very important area, which is ethical, professional, and quality control issues. How important this area is, you will realize that from the examiner article. Now, just to show you a glimpse of that, if I just put in front of your screen the examiner technique article, which is right here. Part 1, ethics, such an important article. And you read the first paragraph and you will be amazed what the examiner is telling you. If you see the first paragraph on your screen, this one really sets the tone of its importance. I'm reading this paragraph. It says ethical standards and their application form a major part of the advanced audit and assurance syllabus and are examined regularly. So examiner is saying it's a major part of the syllabus and they are examined regularly. Perhaps if you've seen the past paper, in each and every exam setting, you will see a question on this topic for less marks or more marks. This has been a topic which is not omitted in many recent past papers. Then the examiner tells in the next line, often the marks for this area, often the marks for this area will be spread over more than one question and may be combined with planning, professional issues, or standalone. So this question can come as a standalone question. This question can be combined with planning. This question can be combined with professional issues. But the more important thing the examiner is telling us, it will be spread over more than one question. So will I find an ethical and professional issue question just in question number 1? No, examiner is saying you might even find it in the question number 1 and might again find it in the question number 2 and even in the question number 3. September 18 exams is a good example. In the September 18 exams, in the question number 1, in the question number 2, and in the question number 3, in all the 3 questions, the examiner tested this topic. So examiner is giving you a very true statement here that it will be spread over more than one question. So when you enter the exam hall and you're focusing on a 100 marks paper here, you should assure that in a 100 marks paper, the contribution of this topic can be significant. So don't just underestimate this topic. Don't just expect that I can only see this in the one of a question. This can be in 2 or even 3 of the questions in the exam paper. So that is the importance, right, of this particular topic. Now, when you look at this particular topic from the exam perspective, the very first thing the examiner has made clear, let's keep accumulating them. The very first thing the examiner has made clear is that it is something which can be tested in many questions in a single exam setting. It could be tested in many questions in a single exam setting. And best example of that is the September 18 exams, where it was tested in all the 3 questions. So tested in many questions in a single exam setting. So that means it is a very important area for a student's success. But the problem is the students are weak in this area. Let's see what is the problem with students when they attempt this area in an examination environment. Okay, let's start to get to problems. Let's first start with ethical issues. I'll be doing it in the bifurcation of 3. Let's first discuss the ethical issues, then discuss the professional issues, and then discuss the quality control issues, and then sum up them together so that we have an idea of a complete question which comes on this topic. Now, if we start first with ethical issues, number 1, perhaps ethical issues is an area where students are comparatively better because they have a carry forward knowledge coming from audit and assurance exam, or they have a carry forward knowledge coming from an F8 exam. Examiner appreciate this thing. Examiner believe that when you shift from the F8 exams to the P7 exams, you have a very sound knowledge of ethics because you're very familiar with the code of conduct. You're very familiar with the threats to objectivity. You're very familiar with confidentiality. So the students tend to perform better on ethical issues, but they tend to perform very bad on the professional issue and the quality control issue because that's an area they are doing for the first time in the advanced audit and assurance exam. Let's see how the examiner illustrate this situation in the article. When the examiner picks the article on ethical issue, examiner makes this very clear over here. If you see this paragraph in front of your screen, the examiner highlights this in this paragraph here. Examiner says, you will be familiar with the ACCA's Code of Ethics from the Audit and Assurance exam. This mirrors the IESBA's Code of Ethics. So you will be familiar with the 5 basic principles. So examiner is saying you will be familiar with the 5 basic principles of integrity, objectivity, professional competence and due care, confidentiality, and professional behavior. You will also be familiar with the journal areas of threats. You will be also familiar with the journal areas of threats, self-review, self-interest, advocacy, familiarity, and intimidation. So examiner is saying this is all what you carry forward from the F8 exams, the audit and assurance exam. So examiner is giving us a very perfect definition here that in the ethical issues, the code of ethics or the code of conduct is what every student know from the AA paper, not from the AAA paper, right? So code of conduct is a very important document here, and the student have a carry forward knowledge on this. Examiner makes it very clear that when you look at the code of conduct, you should be knowing the threats to objectivity, because that's the most examinable area. The student should know the self-review threat. The student should know the self-interest threat. The student should know the advocacy threat. The student should know the intimidation threat. And then the student should know the familiarity threat. So examiner says these all threats is what you know from the previous version of the exam paper. But you need to put them in the context of the advanced audit and assurance exams. So is it right that the perception which I am taking in the session today is right or wrong? If I can get your quick responses to that, that the students are good on the side of ethics, but they're weak on the side of professional and quality control. Respond to my question. Do you believe you're good in ethics? Okay, some are even saying they're bad in ethics, right? So obviously this session will help you mitigate that problem. But generally, listen to my second question. Generally, are you weaker in the side of professional and quality control? Okay, so that's a very clear answer coming now, that the students agree they are more weaker in the side of professional and quality control, but most of the students agree they're good in the side of ethics. Some of the students disagree, even saying no, they are even bad in the side of ethics even. Okay, irrespective, that was just to see the mindset of the students in the live session today. Now let's structure the ethical issues in front of your screen. Now, when you look at an ethical issue in the advanced audit and assurance exam, what basically is the concerning point? The concerning point is that the students pick the ethical issue, or the student pick the ethical threat. Is that right? You are all capable of picking from a scenario. This is a self-review threat. This is a self-interest threat. This is an advocacy threat. This is an intimidation threat. I think students are relatively good on that they can pick from the case. This is the threat, right? But the students are bad on explaining why it is a threat. So student pick the ethical issue or threat, and that's an area where students are good. But the area where students are bad is the second one. Students fail to explain why it is a threat, and that's an area where students are weak at, and that's the reason we lose marks. Have you ever imagined how many marks we get for identifying a issue? We get 1 mark. So if you just identify a threat, you are probably getting 0.5 marks. But if you want to get the full 1 mark, so you need to justify why it is a threat. So how many times we don't take that full 1 mark? That is a big problem. So student pick the ethical threat, but student fail to explain why it is an ethical threat. So are we scoring the full 1 mark per issue or per threat? The answer is no. We're not scoring the full one mark per issue per threat, because we're just doing half the side of it. And I'll be demonstrating in the session today how to explain. My focal point of the session today would be explaining. Let's see, has the examiner given us a solution of explaining? Is the examiner guiding us how should we be explaining a threat in a context? Let's go back to the examiner article and see, has the examiner picked this point in the article, which is a concerning point. Okay, back to the article of the examiner. Now I scroll down the examiner article. The next paragraph. You need to pick up your mistakes today, and in the next 1 hour, if you pick your mistake, that means you're all set and ready for the June 2019 exams. So I'll be asking in the last 10 minutes of the session, were you able to identify your mistakes and weaknesses in a topic, ethical, professional, and quality control? So concentrate on it as effectively as possible. Look at this paragraph in front of your screen. It says, the situation you will be appraising at this level will usually involve an assessment of those same principles within the scenario given in the question. So you know the principles from the F8 paper, but you are applying those principles to a different scenario in a AAA exam. In addition, you may be expected to identify situations. In addition, that is an important point now, right? In addition, you may be expected to identify situations where the auditor is at a risk of assuming a management responsibility with respect to providing additional services to audit client. One thing. Now that is an extra element. That is not an F8 element because the examiner says in addition. So examiner is bringing you now to the P7 paper. Examiner is saying that what basically ethics is. Examiner is saying there is something extra. And what something extra is that the students should be capable of identifying a management threat. So I need to focus on that as well. Examiner is saying in addition. So that's an extra thing which is not part of the F8 exams. Management threat. How many of you are familiar with management threat? How many of you have tackled management threat when you attempted the past papers? Respond with your answers. How many of you had an idea of management threat? How many of you are listening to this terminology for the very first time? Okay, it's strange that some of the students are even saying they had no idea of this. Okay, that's proportion is increasing of students saying this is the first time they're coming across this jargon. So that means you're reading this article for the first time in the session today. You are all appearing for the June 2019 exams, right? It's strange that you're reading this article with me today in this live session. And those of you who have an idea of management threat, that's wonderful, right? Okay, back to the session. So we need to focus on something extra today, right? Management is saying the extra thing you should be knowing is to know the management threat. So I will be giving you some examples, what situations give rise to management threats and how you deal with them in exam paper. Okay, let's go back to the article again. Then the examiner continues the same statement, which I have underlined in the blue. It says, in addition, you may be expected to identify situations where the auditor is at a risk of assuming a management responsibility with respect to providing additional services to audit clients, or examiner breaks the statement now. Examiner says, in the next line, the examiner says, or appreciate the difference between listed and non-listed clients when it comes to applying these principles. You need to know this, and I'm yet again raising another question. Examiner is saying you just need not to know a management threat, but you should also be knowing the difference between a listed company and a non-listed company when you are looking at an ethical threat. So you should know the difference between the two companies. Do you have this idea that there are many ethical threats which, if arise in a listed company, are prohibited. Do you know that in a listed company there is a list of prohibited services, but in a non-listed company there is no such thing? So in an exam paper, if a question is on ethics and a question on ethics starts with ABC is a listed company, will we underline listed company in the exam paper? Will listed company be something important in a question on ethics? Will we underline listed company in a scenario on ethics? Because that can be really critical. Because in a listed company, there are some services which are prohibited. In a listed company, there are some services which are permissible. Now, you should read the BPP or the Kaplan textbook for the chapter on ethics, because this is an area where you should know from a textbook what is a permissible service and what is a prohibited service. So this is an area where you should know the knowledge. So it's better that you should have a textbook here, and from a textbook you read this topic to know what are permissible for a listed company and what are prohibited for listed company. So in this area, I'm encouraging all of you to have a textbook reading. So prefer a book reading here, right? Okay, so examiner is saying there are two extra things a student should know. So we should be emphasizing in the session today on these two extra things. Within the limitation of the session today, I will be guiding you about a management threat and a difference between a listed and a non-listed company when it comes to ethical threats. Okay, that completes one part of the examiner article. Now the last thing, and we're going down with practice on ethics. Let's see, is the examiner telling me something extra in this article? The best thing the examiner has done in this article is this part. See this ABC. Examiner says in an exam paper, when you're reading a case in a AAA exam, the very first thing you should do as a student, you should first identify the threat first. So you read the case, you underline the threat, you annotate the threat when you are in a reading and planning time. Then when you identify a threat, when you're identifying a threat, examiner says then you need to evaluate the significance of the threat identified. And the last thing, when you identify a threat and you evaluate the significance of the threat, you will then apply safeguards. Now, is not the examiner giving us a guidance on gaining marks here? Identify the threat, evaluate the significance of the threat, and apply safeguard. So if I try to make a mnemonic of this, in an exam paper, I'll first find a threat, identify. I'll then evaluate the significance of the threat, and I'll apply the safeguard. Or I can make it this way. I'll identify the threat, T. I'll identify the significance of the threat, S, and I'll apply the safeguards. So TSS sounds better because I seems to be a word which is very blurred here, right? T is a threat, the significance of the threat, and then the safeguards. So examiner is giving us a way of gaining that 1 mark. Now, how many of you ever bothered about reading this paragraph carefully from the examiner article to know the definition of gaining 1 mark? And how many of you are coming across in the session today to know this is given in the examiner article? So did you ever bothered about bracketing this paragraph ABC from the examiner article, and did you ever bothered about making a mnemonic of this to know exactly how to gain that 1 mark? Because a lot of times students read the examiner article, but they don't annotate the examiner article, or they don't try to understand the examiner article in terms of how to link that to a case study, right? So have we got something from the examiner article? So the examiner is saying that when you are identifying a threat in P7, ethical threat, there is a three-step model to gain 1 mark. To gain marks. Number 1, identify the threat and evaluate the threat, and then apply safeguards. Now you should know you're not getting 1 mark here. Safeguards has an extra 1 mark, and then to identify a threat you have 0.5, and to evaluate the threat you have 0.5 marks. Now try to understand what is evaluate. Evaluate will divide into 2 parts. First of all, evaluate, number 1, why it is a threat and what is the implication of the threat on the audit. Think that when you're writing the answer. Suppose you pick a self-review threat. For 1 minute, you will think, why self-review threat? Why self-review threat will have any impact on the audit? What is the implication of a self-review threat on the audit process? How it will impair the process of the audit? So when you're writing a paragraph for a threat, the very first thing you should be writing is why it is a threat, what is the implication of the threat on the audit. Then further, you can think about what is the significance of the threat. Now, significance of the threat depends upon company is listed. If it is a listed company, will the ethical threat automatically becomes important? Yes or no? If a company is listed, will the ethical threat automatically becomes important? And if it is a non-listed company, the ethical threat will not be significant in comparison to a threat in a listed company. So a self-review threat in a listed company and a self-review threat in a non-listed company, which is more significant? Okay, that's wonderful. Second, what is the significance of the threat? Is significance of the person involved. If the threat relates with a junior versus a threat relates with a manager, which is more significant? Because the manager has a duty to supervise, the manager has a duty to monitor. If the manager is not impartial, if the manager is not independent, how will he conduct the review? How will he conduct the review of the working papers? So, person involved. Do you believe if a threat relates with a manager or a threat relates with a partner is a more significant threat? And a threat relates with a junior or a senior is less significant? So manager and a partner. So if in an exam paper you believe a threat relates with a partner or a manager, do you realize it is a significant threat here? So can you understand how to gain the 0.5 marks? Why it is a threat is a must, right? This first point is a must. Examiner says significance is a higher level skill and is not demonstrated by every student. But look at the yellow highlighted bullet. Why it is a threat? Is it a must to write in the exam paper why it is a threat? But the examiner says, what is the significance of the threat? What is the significance of the threat is a higher level skill which mostly students don't demonstrate. So again, that is a skill which can come with practice, right? And I'll be demonstrating that in the session today. How would you emphasize on a significance of the threat, right? So significance can be on 2 grounds, right? There is no third example, right? Significance listed significance, person, right? There is no third example of significance, right? So significance is listed, significance is person. That's the two things you have to pick from a case study. And once I solve a question with you, so I'll portray how you pick and write on the significance of the threat in the session today. Okay, so how many marks will we get for identifying a threat? Quick answers, we're moving on. How many marks for identifying a threat? 0.5. How many marks for explaining a threat? 0.5. So for a complete threat, how many marks are we getting? 1. And for a safeguard, how many marks for safeguards? 1 for safeguard. Okay, moving on. Now, we're all set and prepared for a drill on ethics. Let's recap. In terms of ethical issues, we should first know the code of conduct. You should know the self-review, self-interest, advocacy, intimidation, and familiarity threats. The concerning point is students are good in picking the threat but bad in explaining the threat. So are we scoring the full 1 mark? Perhaps no. Then examiner tends to give us some good idea here that there is something extra to learn. Management threat and a difference between a listed company and a non-listed company. And then we have a three-step model to apply in the exam paper: identify the threat, evaluate the threat, and apply the safeguards. We got that three-step model from the examiner article. Okay, the last thing now. First of all, let's find management threat is what. Has the examiner given us some help on the management threat? Because the examiner was saying this is something extra, so we should focus on management threat. It's something very simple, and within the span of the next 5 minutes, perhaps you will be having a very sound definition of what is a management threat. Let's go back to the examiner article, finding some clues of a management threat here. Okay, let's write for you what is a management threat. Now, in terms of a management threat, first, it's to assume management responsibilities, right? Auditor assumes management responsibility. Let's make it more specific. Auditor assumes management responsibilities. Examples: preparing financial statements. Is preparing financial statement a management responsibility? Do you all agree with that? Okay. And the management asks the auditor to prepare the financial statement. So are we assuming the management responsibility? We are. Good. Second, designing and implementing the internal control systems. Is that the management responsibility to design and implement the internal control system? So if the management asks the auditor to design and implement the internal control system, will that be assuming the management responsibility? Okay, next example. Prevention of fraud. Who is responsible to prevent fraud? The management, right? So if the auditor is asked to involve in the process of preventing a fraud, will that be assuming the management responsibility? You must have heard a term known as segregation of duty. Is segregation of duty important? And if there is no segregation of duty, what will happen? What will happen if there is no segregation of duty? Something wrong will happen? Lack of control, fraud, controls are weak. Okay, good answers. Collusion. So do you all realize that if there is a segregation of duty, that's good. So is there a segregation of duty between auditor responsibility and management responsibility? Is there a line between auditor responsibility and management responsibility? And if the management and the auditor becomes one, If the management and the auditor becomes one, what will happen? Collusion. What will happen? Who will conduct the audit? Who will conduct the audit if the management and the auditor becomes one? So do you all understand there has to be a dividing line between the management responsibility and the auditor responsibility? And if the auditor assumes the management responsibility, that's the end of the story, right? If the auditor assumes the management responsibility, that's the end of the story. But now get the point of importance here. Assuming management responsibilities in a listed company is prohibited. Assuming management responsibilities in a listed company is prohibited. Just 1 minute, I'm bringing it to the next page here. Okay, assuming management responsibilities in a listed company is prohibited. But if it is a non-listed company, suppose, I'm giving you a situation, judge yourself, right? Suppose there is an owner managed company and the management of the owner managed company asks you to prepare a financial statement. Vice versa, the finance director of a listed company asks you to prepare a financial statement, which is a more strange situation. So if a listed company asks you to prepare a financial statement, you will think for a minute, didn't the listed company have a competence to prepare a financial statement? Didn't the finance director of a listed company have a competence to prepare a financial statement? But if a owner managed company asks me to prepare a financial statement, I'll say, okay, a owner managed company is weak in competence, perhaps. Owner managed company is a small company, perhaps, and perhaps I can prepare the financial statement. So the code of conduct says for a listed company, it's prohibited that you assume on a management responsibility, as simple as that. For a non-listed company, you can, with proper safeguards. So is everyone clear on a management responsibility, assuming management responsibility? Take another example. Attending a meeting with a bank. Whose responsibility is to attend a meeting with bank? So if the auditor is asked to attend a meeting with bank, is the auditor assuming the management responsibility? Right? So are you understanding? Can you pick it from the case that what a management should do? So if the auditor tries to step into the shoes of the management, that is the definition of a management threat. So within the limitation of the session, that's the maximum I can guide you on management threat. Rest you have to spend time on reading the textbook, either of BPP or Kaplan, because that can guide you on examples. I have given you many examples. These are like maximum examples which comes in the past paper. So you can survive the past papers with these examples, assuming management responsibility. And it's prohibited in a listed company. You can see this written by the examiner in the article even. See this. Can you see in front of your screen this point? Can you see this box in the orange? It says the design of the system and control is a management responsibility. So a review of such may give rise to a situation where the auditor is assuming management responsibility by taking on the role of a management. Examiner is writing this is 1 mark. Do you see the way examiner wrote management responsibility for 1 mark? Examiner picks the problem, the design of the controls is a management responsibility. So a review of such may give rise to a situation where the auditor is assuming management responsibility. Did you find the way of writing management responsibility? Right. Obviously, Sonika, management is ultimately responsible, right, for the design, for the implementation and even for the review. There is a department known as internal audit department, right? So primarily to run a company and to run every function of a company is a management responsibility, though the management delegates that responsibility to an auditor. Okay, then see this next point on management responsibility. This is a very careful point which will clarify what I just told you. See this paragraph. It says the code states that the threat to independence of undertaking management responsibility for an audit client is so significant. It's so significant that there are no safeguards which can reduce the threat to an acceptable level. So the code states that the threat to independence of undertaking a management responsibility for an audit client, which audit client? Listed company, is so significant that there are no safeguards which can reduce the threat to an acceptable level. So is management threat permissible? Is management threat permissible for a listed company? It's prohibited, right? It's prohibited. And just another just a reminder on the housekeeping instruction. There are lots of questions which are coming from students which I can see on my screen, but because I need to focus on my lecture, so I cannot just shift my focus on your question answer session currently. It would be better if you can put these specific questions to the WhatsApp group. Iftikhar Kabir, there are many questions coming from your side. If you can put them on the WhatsApp group. Jeevan, there are a lot of questions coming from your side. If you can put that on the WhatsApp group, so that would be wonderful. I can answer them right after the session ends, right? Okay, back to the session. So is everyone clear on the management thread and the prohibition of the management thread in a listed company? That's one thing the examiner wants us to know. The second thing the examiner wants us to know was the difference between a listed company and a non-listed company. Because a lot of time that makes a big difference in exam paper, right? So when you're reading a case on ethics, you need to see whether the company is listed or non-listed, because that can make a big difference when you're writing the safeguards. So management threat was permissible in a non-listed company, and management threat is prohibited in a listed company. Okay, let's find the answer for this one. Now, when you're reading a case, will you underline the nature of the company in the exam paper? Will underlining the nature of company be important? Okay, so you know the importance of underlining the nature of the company, right? That's wonderful. Okay, now when you know which company, and you underlined the company in case. Now you cannot do a blunder if you underline the nature of the company in the question paper, right? Right, the nature of the company, right? So if it is a listed company, then there is a problem, because in a listed company, some services are permissible and some services are prohibited. If a service is permissible, then obviously we need to apply safeguards, like having different teams, like having a different team or having an independent partner review. I hope you know these typical safeguards, which is given in textbook. You can apply safeguards like having different teams, having an independent partner review, etc. But when some of the services in a listed company are prohibited, so if something is prohibited, you cannot apply the safeguard, right? Prohibited means end of the story. Prohibited means you cannot do anything else. It's prohibited by the code of conduct. So There is a problem with listed companies, right? That's the reason I'm telling you should go to the textbook, see a table in the textbook, what services are allowed and what services are not, so that you have a better understanding. You have plenty of time before 3rd of June. You can still read at least one chapter from the textbook, which is on ethics. Then when you see a non-listed company in context in the exam paper, for a non-listed company, all services are permissible, but you need to apply safeguards as as given above in examples. So same examples will come down. So there is a more lenient approach towards non-listed companies, and there is a more strict approach towards listed company, because listed company do have a public interest, right? So please do read a chapter from whichever book you like or whichever book you have, but in a textbook you will have a chapter on the fundamental principles. So do you assure me you will read the chapter from the textbook on ethics and the fundamental principle? And when you are reading this chapter, will you make a table, list prohibited and permissible? Will you make that table on your notepad or on your register? So will that chapter help you in the exam paper to know which service is allowed and which is not? Right? So this is the first time over the 3 days. This is the first time over the 3 days that I've recommended you to read a chapter from a textbook, because that's definitely a need to be good in this area. Okay, so examiner wants us to know the management threat. We've done that, and the examiner has written the statement management threat in the article. So you can read the examiner article for how to write a management threat for 1 mark. Non-listed companies, everything is permissible. Listed companies, some services are permissible and some services are not. Right. Again, there is a very specific request, because every time you tell the student community to read the textbook, the student community will respond back, do you have a summary of the services which are allowed and disallowed? So that's another interesting questions being raised on the screen currently. Students asking for, do you have a list of that? Obviously, that's an easiest solution if I have a list of that. But I want you to do the efforts, because if you do efforts, you're increasing your chances of success. I do have that list, and I'll be posting that on the WhatsApp group after I end the session, right? So don't worry about that, but still make a habit of reading the textbook. So is that clear to everyone? I'll give you a list of services which are allowed and prohibited to listed companies on the WhatsApp group. Okay, see now how happy the student community is, right? In terms of a sigh of relief that they don't need to read the textbook and they will get a summary from the tutor about what is allowed and what is not allowed. Okay, back to the session. Okay, anything left from the examiner situations? Have we done the extra things? The extra thing was a management threat. We had focus on that. The extra thing was a difference between a listed company and a non-listed company. We're focused on that, and I have accepted your recommendation to share with you a list of services. So I'll be doing that. So everyone is clear on a 3-step model. We first identify a threat in the exam paper, right? We will then evaluate the threat. We will then evaluate the threat, and we will then apply the safeguard. Is everyone sound on that 3-step model in front of your screen coming from the examiner article? Okay, now let's start the second phase of our discussion. Now, I specifically have a question for the session today, which is from the December 2017 exams, which is right in front of your screen. And I'm looking at the B part of this question from December 2017. And the B part of the question has a very specific requirement down here. and you must be very familiar with this typical requirement which comes in the AAA exam. Comment on the ethical and professional issues raised and recommend any actions which should be taken in respect of the request from the management team of the Cheetah company. So we need to focus on ethical issues. We then need to focus on some professional issues. Okay, that's wonderful. We then need to focus upon some actions, safeguards, and in respect of the request from the management. So let's see what is the request from the management and what are ethical and professional issues with respect to the request from the management from Cheetah company. So let's prepare ourselves for the first drilling. December 2017, we are doing a question in the session where there is a request from management of the Cheetah company. So let's see what the management is requesting us from Cheetah company. Examiner is saying that you got a request from the management of Cheetah company and you need to consider the ethical and professional issues, plus you need to apply actions. You need to put in the actions, and we have 8 marks to score. Now, I hope you realize that on the day 1, yesterday day 2, and today day 3, I will make you realize planning. A lot of time we don't do planning and we just rush to answer. First thing you should do in the exam paper is do what I am doing on the screen. There is a request from the management. We need to read the case for that. But in the request, we need to consider the ethical matters and the professional matters, and we need to write in the action. Whatever we do, how many marks we will gain for that? For ethical issue, for professional issue, for action, each of them will have how many marks? 1 each, right? So before I even read the question, I know the marking scheme. I have 1 mark for the issue. I have 1 mark for the action. Let's see how many we can find once we start reading the case study in this live session. Okay, let's go down, see what's the problem with the request. Okay, I'm reading the case right. Keep a focus strong on the case. The management team of Cheetah Company has also approached Leopard and Company. Leopard and Company is the audit firm, right? So they have approached us, Leopard and Company, to ask whether representatives of the firm would be available to attend a meeting with the company's banker. So that's the very first problem, whether representatives of the firm would be available to attend a meeting with the company banker. Now in the exam, I will think if the company management is asking me to represent in a meeting with bank. So if the client is asking me to represent in a meeting with bank, I will think in the exam paper that this representation will first cause an advocacy threat. Why an advocacy threat? Because by representing the client, in a meeting with bank, the audit firm will be promoting the business interest of the client. See why. See the why after. Can you read the why carefully? Advocacy threat because by representing the client in a meeting with bank, the audit firm will be promoting the business interest of the client. Who needs the loan? Who needs the loan from the bank? So is the auditor promoting the business interest? If the auditor is present in the meeting, will the client be able to get the loan? Right? Second, management threat. Because negotiating a loan from bank is a management responsibility. Negotiating a loan from bank is a management responsibility, and the auditor, if represent the management, will also be assuming management role and responsibilities. Right? See how we are drilling the question? We have an advocacy thread because the client was asking us to represent them. Did we found that word in the case study, represent? And then automatically we thought in the exam paper that uh, negotiating a loan is a management responsibility. So when negotiating a loan is a management responsibility, so we wrote another example that this is also a management responsibility. We got 2 marks. Let's find the more issues in the question. Okay, whether representatives of the firm would be available to attend a meeting with the banker who they are hoping will finance the acquisition of Zebra company. So is that the business interest of Cheetah? That if they get the success of the loan, they will use the loan to acquire a Zebra company. So if the auditor attends a meeting with the management of the bank, will they be promoting the interest of the Cheetah company in acquiring the Zebra company? To support the management team in conveying the suitability of the acquisition of Zebra company. From the meeting, for the meeting, now focus on this statement very carefully. For the meeting, the bank requires the most up-to-date interim accounts of Cheetah company with the accompanying auditor independent interim review report. If you go to a meeting with the bank, right, the bank would like to see the interim half yearly financial statements with the auditor report on it as well, that what the auditor have said about the interim report. Now when you later come for the audit, knowing that you have uh, put this interim report in front of the bank in a meeting, and when you come for the full year audit at the year end, will this interim accounts cause a self review threat? Because in a meeting with bank you must have discussed these accounts. In a meeting with bank you must have discussed these financial statements. So when you come for the full year audit, when you come for the final audit, will the final audit be distracted because you know that you have seen 6 monthly results already? So will it cause the self review threat here? Because I am the auditor, right, of the Cheetah company. I have to remember that Leopard is the auditor of the Cheetah company. So when the Leopard company will come at the year end to conduct the audit of Cheetah company, it will cause a self review problem as well, right? So just keep that in mind. I'm reading further. Your firm is due to complete the interim review shortly, and the management team of Cheetah has requested that the interim review is completed quickly. Is the management trying to pressurize you that you complete the interim review quickly? So can that be an intimidation threat? And if they want us to do it quickly, Can you link quickly with professional issues here? Can you link this quickly with a professional issue here? If I do something quickly, will I be skeptical? If I do something quickly, will I be skeptical? If I do something quickly, will it compromise the quality? So can I connect this with skeptical mindset and the quality factors? So quickly has an ethical dilemma, and quickly has a professional dilemma, right? So can you relate quickly with ethics, and can you relate quickly with professional? So see, there was a need here quickly, so that it does not hold up negotiations with the bank, stating that if it does, it may affect the outcome of the next audit tender. So management is saying if you delay the interim review, it may affect the outcome of the next audit tender. So is the management trying to intimidate us that if you delay completing the interim review, they might change the auditor? It may affect the outcome of the next audit tender? So is the management again trying to influence the auditor that if you don't complete the work quickly, we might even think about changing the auditor in the upcoming tender? So see, did you find some problems in 8 marks here? Let's go back to the word file. The first problem we found was representing in a meeting with the bank. Then there was the interim review. Now the interim review would most likely become a self-review threat. Now the self-review threat is because Leopard is the auditor. Leopard is the auditor of Cheetah, and later in the final audit, the work performed on interim review will not be critically reviewed by the audit team, or the audit team will be reluctant of doing work, or the audit team will be reluctant doing work on areas performed in interim review. So we need to keep in mind that Leopard is also the auditor of Cheetah, right? So later when they come for audit, that will be a big distraction for them. That they know that our audit firm has already done the interim review. So an interim review would cause a distraction in the final audit, and that converts to a self-review threat. Then after that, we have the big problem. We had a problem that the management asked us to perform things quickly. So we thought quickly will result in losing skepticism, will compromise quality, will compromise quality of audit work, quickly will increase the negligence of the auditor, will increase auditor's negligence. See, how many problems can be there with just doing something quickly? The quickly can lose the skeptical mindset. The quickly can compromise the quality of the audit. The quickly will increase the auditor's negligence. Then there was a last problem, the tender problem. So management was trying to intimidate the auditor. There was an intimidation threat with the tender. Intimidation because the management was pressurizing. The management was pressurizing the auditor to complete work quickly, else they will replace the auditor. So is the management bargaining for their favorable outcome? Is the management trying to bargain for a favorable outcome in the last line? They want work to be done quickly. That's a favorable outcome for the management, right? So is the management trying to bargain here? That if you listen to me, I'll not change the auditor, but if you don't listen to me, I'll change the auditor. Right? Now, see how many issues we found here. Now, just accumulate your marks here. Did we got 1 mark for advocacy threat here? We got 1 mark for management threat here. We got 1 mark for self-review threat here, 3. We got will lose skepticism, 4 marks. Will compromise the quality of the audit work, 5 marks. Will increase the negligence of the auditor, 6 marks. And the intimidation threat is already taking us to 7 marks. Now think, if, listen to my statement carefully and react on my statement. If the auditor attends a meeting with the bank and the loan is successful, will the loan become part of the balance sheet? And are we the auditor? If the loan is successful, it becomes part of the balance sheet. The leopard company will come for the audit. Will it cause a self-review threat? So is there another problem we can write in the exam paper, that if the loan becomes part of the financial statement and we are the auditor of this company, so will there be a self-review threat associated with the loan? Because we will not be critical. We will not be critical of the loan becoming part of the financial statement, knowing the fact that the loan was negotiated by the auditor, right? So quickly, there are many marks in quickly, right? Losing skepticism is a unique situation. Quality is a unique situation, and negligence is a unique situation, right? So if you develop these points, you can score 1 mark. So you need to develop the point of skepticism, you need to develop the point of quality, you need to develop the point of negligence, right? So can you get another self-review here? You can relate that self-review to a loan in the financial statement. Loan in the financial statement, if successful. So can this loan be a self-review? Loan will become a self-review threat later when leopard come for auditor, leopard come for auditing the financial statements. They will not be skeptical, right? So you can gain another 1 mark. Now let's write down the actions. What actions can we take of the different problems we got? First action, assuming management responsibilities is prohibited by the code of conduct. That's the action for management responsibility. Another action, assuming management responsibility is prohibited by the code of conduct, so the audit firm can't represent the client in a meeting with bank. So if we refuse to represent the client in a meeting, will other problems be mitigated? If we are not attending the meeting, will it give rise to intimidation or self-review or any such things? Because the basic problem started from representing the client. So if we refuse to represent, automatically the other problems would resolve, right? But if you want to get knowledge for the other issues, intimidation, you need to discuss with management that work cannot be performed quickly. Work cannot be performed quickly because it increases the firm negligence. You can have separate teams. You can have separate teams to avoid, separate teams to mitigate the self-review threat. So for every threat, there can be a safeguard, right? You can have a safeguard for self-review threat, that you can have different teams. If you can even discuss with management about the quality problem, that if we do work quickly, it will compromise the quality. You can have a prohibition for management responsibility. So there can be many actions you can think about in exam context. Okay, just give me a quick answers to my question. If you get a case on ethical and professional issues in exam paper, the very first thing you will do is you will plan the answer before you write the answer. Is that important? Will you read the requirements first? You will circle the requirements just as I did in the session. You will try to understand what is the examiner asking in the requirement and how many marks do I have to allocate. Now, once you read the requirements just as I did and circle the requirement, will you then go down on the case study and you start annotating the case study? Is annotating the case study important? Will you annotate the case study? Will you underline the case study and think about, okay, this is an ethical problem, okay, this is another ethical problem, this is another ethical problem? Will that help you gaining marks and have a smooth journey for 8 marks? See, no scenario is difficult. It's only that we make the scenario difficult because we get into panic. If you spend 2 to 3 minutes first on reading the requirements and understanding the requirements, there is a fair chance you will understand the case study. A lot of time the panic arises because we don't understand what is the examiner is asking. So is that important to read and understand the requirement carefully? Will that really reduce the level of panic and stress in the exam paper? So please ensure that you read the requirement and the marking scheme very carefully and then read the case to identify the number of marks you need to gain. And every time there is more information in the case than required to answer an 8 marks answer. So you can choose the points on which you think you are commandful. You can choose the points to write in your answer where you think I can give a very commandful answer to examiner. But the bottom line is that when you are writing the answer, should you be focusing on because, which is the why? Should you be focusing on again because, which is the why? Did every time I wrote because was that very important? So will I just be writing for the examiner a threat, or will I be writing for the examiner why it is a threat? Now, just one last thing before I shift towards professional and quality control issue. When you present the answer on a question like such, you can present your answer this way. You put on top the heading, request from Cheetah Company, request from Cheetah Company, put that as a heading in the exam paper, right? Under this heading, you start reading the case, and in the order of the case, you can start putting headings. Examiner, if you've seen the recent answers of examiner tries to put threats as headings. So that is more good for the assessor checking the paper. So request from Cheetah Company, the first heading, advocacy threat, and explained under this heading why it is an advocacy threat. Then put the next heading, management threat, and explain under this heading why it is a management threat. Then go down, tell a self-review threat. Then under this heading, tell what is a self-review threat. Then put a next heading, quickly, and tell what are professional issues relating with quickly. Then go down, write tender, and then under the tender you can write intimidation, and then justify why it is an intimidation. So can you bifurcate your case with headings It will be so good for the person checking your paper. The person can pick from your situation what you're writing, and then in the last you can write actions, knowing how many marks are left. Will you write all the actions, or will you see how many marks are left to write actions? Suppose once I write the issues, I take 6 marks from the issues, and I'll ideally write 2 actions right to get to 8 marks. If I write 5 issues, probably I'll be writing 3 actions right to go to the 8-mark situation. So will you present your answer with subheadings? Will it help the assessor checking the paper, and will even help you in the exam paper, boosting your confidence? Right, so that's one recommended way, right? That's one recommended way of putting the answer. And again, it's up to you the way you want to put the answer. I want to teach you the best way in which you can gain marks, and that's the best way even for the person who is checking the paper. So try to facilitate your marking team, because the marking team likes things in headings, right? Because they can pick from the heading the point you're raising in the exam paper. Okay, that's the first drill on ethical side, where students are more stronger. And I'll be spending an equal time on professional and quality control issues. I'll take into account the June 2018 exams, just to guide you how bad students are on the side of quality control and professional issues. So have you realized some weaknesses on the side of ethics so far? It's like 80 minutes into the session, and we need to change the session now towards professional and quality control. So at this point in time, if you can take your feedback on ethics, have you realized your weaknesses in these last 80 minutes? Okay, keep posting your comments. I'm just having a glance at your comments. And again, questions not answered, put them on the WhatsApp group. Okay. Did you realize the importance of reading the Examiner article on ethics in the last 80 minutes? Okay. And in the last 80 minutes, are you clear on the marking scheme, the need to read the textbook, the need to read the textbook for ethics? So let's recap ethics, and I'm going on to the very first break, because post break, we now need to start the second phase, professional and quality control. Okay, ethics, key learnings. Let's do the recap. First of all, need to read the textbook. Need to read the textbook for ethics. Second, to know management threat. To know listed and non-listed company, and to know the approach to answer question, which is the 3 steps model given by the examiner, the 3-step model, and to know the marking scheme, and to know how to present the answer. Have you gone over all of them in front of your screen now? Do you realize from the last 80 minutes that there is a need to read the book for ethics? Is there a need to read book for ethics? Yes. Did you realize the management threat in the last 80 minutes? Okay, and did you identify how important it is to bifurcate between a listed company and a non-listed company? Any book, right? Any book, whichever you want to read. Both books are wonderful. Did you realize the approach to the answer? First to identify the threat, then to evaluate the threat, and then to apply the safeguard. And then you realize the marking scheme and the way to present the answer. Right. So I tried to put a structure in the constraint of time. I hope with this structure in mind, you can do wonders on the 3rd of June if you keep practicing. Practice is required. Keep practicing the same way you have been taught in the session, because that is something that can really do wonder for you on the 3rd of June. Now, yes, in the second phase of the lecture today, I'll be focusing on the professional and quality control issues. And Hassan Abbas, we did highlighted the professional issue, which was quickly. Quickly was a professional issue, right? Losing skepticism, compromising the quality of audit. We are not bifurcating the issues, right? Uh, did you saw in my answer that I bifurcated? This is an ethical issue and this is a professional issue. Did I did the bifurcation in writing my answer? No. Uh, were we specific to an issue and why it is an issue? Please respond to this very important question of mine. Will we get marks in the exam paper for writing an issue and why it is an issue? Will we get marks in the exam paper for writing an issue and why it is an issue? Or will we get marks in the exam paper for bifurcating the issue? Will I get marks for bifurcating this is ethical, this is professional? Right? There are no marks for bifurcation. You are appearing in an advanced audit and assurance exam. You are a manager. So manager is not bothered about bifurcation. Manager is bothered about why it is a problem. And the student community is more concerned with bifurcation and less concerned with why. So are you a manager in AAA paper? So are we more concerned that we should explain why it is a problem? Or rather than we are explaining like a junior, this is a ethical issue, this is a professional issue, right? So irrespective of the issue, you need to tell why it is an issue. So you will gain marks on why, you will not gain marks on bifurcation. Is that clear to everyone? Okay, that's wonderful. Now that's bringing us to our very first break. Relax your minds, come back fresh to the second phase of this day three uh, AAA webinar for June 2019 exams, 9:45 p.m. The Pakistan Standard Time. I'll be back live, and in the last 75 minutes, we will be focusing on quality control and professional issues, looking at examiner concerns, criticisms, problems, and how we can improve upon writing a very good answer for professional and quality control issues, right? So off to a break, and 9:45 p.m. we are resuming back for the second phase of this live session. Welcome back after the break. We are now moving towards the last phase of the day 3, and the focus will now be on professional and quality control issues, because in the first phase prior to the break, we were focusing on the ethical issues. So let's start the journey on the side of professional and quality control issues, and let's see how much knowledge we can gain in the 75 minutes towards the end of the session. Now, first of all, this is something very important on the slides in front of you. I'm reading the bullet number 2 and bullet number 3 first to give you a fair idea what you should have in mind when a question asks for professional and quality control issue. If you look at the professional issues on the bullet number 2, professional issues is within the overall process of the audit, is within the overall process of audit, right from client acceptance to review and finalization stage of audit. Examiner says that the examiner can place this question at any stage of the audit. You can get professional and quality control issues at a planning stage. You can get professional issues at the stage of accepting a new client. You can get professional and quality control issues at the stage of review and finalization, which is the question number 2 of the exam paper. So we need to realize that the professional issues and the quality control issues can be at any stage. But if we just cut short that for the exam paper, it could be more at the planning stage or at the stage of review and finalization. If you have seen past papers, you must have seen there are plenty of past papers at the review and finalization stage where the examiner says you are an engagement quality control manager. So if you are an engagement quality control manager, that means we are at a review and finalization stage, because at a review and finalization stage, the engagement quality control manager checks the quality of the audit which has been performed. So mostly the question comes at the stage of planning, or it comes at the stage of review and finalization. You must have seen questions coming on client acceptance in the past paper, where when you are accepting a new client, you do consider the ethical issues of associated with the new client. You do even consider what are professional issues associated with accepting a new client, like having a competence. Includes issues like professional behavior. So professional behavior is part of professional issues, professional competence and due care, inappropriate client acceptance procedures, inappropriate planning, inadequate or no evidence gathered, wrong allocation of person to a risky area, wrong judgments, improper review or no review of the working paper. Some examples. Obviously, professional behavior is a very important professional issue. Professional competence and due care. If I am not conducting a proper planning of the audit, that itself is a professional issue. I'm not gathering proper evidence, that itself is a professional issue. If I allocate a wrong person to a wrong area, like if I allocate a junior to a risky area, that itself is a professional issue. Or if there is no review of the working paper, or the review of the working paper was carried out in a rush, so you carried out the review of the working paper quickly. You just saw that word quickly in the last question even. So these are all professional issues which ultimately compromise the quality of the audit. I have taken this statement many times even in my previous webinars, that quality can be compromised because of the professional problem or because of the professional issue. Or if there is an ethical dilemma, because of the ethical dilemma even, the quality can compromise. So quality is dependable. Quality depends upon something. So quality is the output. So if there is a professional issue like quickly can compromise the quality. If I have done inadequate planning, the inadequate planning can compromise the quality of the audit. if I have allocated a junior to a risky area, that can compromise the quality of work. So the quality is connected with professional issues. The quality is connected with ethical issues. So we need to understand something broadly in the session today, that when you get a question on professional and quality control issues, you need to be very specific first to understand exactly what the examiner is asking you, because most of the time we don't even understand what the examiner is asking us. Look at the question first. We are focused more now on the side of professional and quality control issues in the second phase of the day 3. And when we look at these professional and quality control issues, where generally students are weaker at, first of all, you should know that the professional issues are within the case. There is no need of bifurcating the issues. So you should not be worried about in a case study, how will I know this is a professional issue? Simply read the case study. Simply read the case study. Simply read the case and identify an issue which you think was wrong, or which you think will have an implication on the audit. Is that difficult? Simply read the case, identify an issue which you think was wrong. So when you're reading a case, can you have a intelligence in the exam hall to identify, no, this is something wrong? And I think that is something which student picks easily. You mostly the student picks something wrong in a question. They're capable of that. Is that the right perception? When you're reading a case, you try to pick, this is something wrong, this is happening wrong. Is that true? Can you respond to this question? So when you are reading a case, you can easily pick, no, this is something wrong. You will have that thought process in the exam paper, no, this is wrong. So if you picked something wrong in the case, that's wonderful. Because if you pick something wrong in the case, then you are on the track, or which you think will have the implication on the audit. So if you pick an issue which was wrong, then what you have to do, if you pick an issue which is wrong, then what you have to tell? You need to tell why it is wrong. You need to tell why it is wrong, plus what is the likely implication. What is the likely implication of this on audit? Is that difficult to do? Is that difficult to do? If you pick an issue which is wrong, then you need to tell why it was wrong and what is likely implication of this on audit. And I'll be demonstrating that in taking a question from the June 2018 exams. So can I conclude on one thing? Pick an issue which is wrong. Is that something students can do mostly? But something again where students are perhaps weaker is to tell why it is wrong. So let's do an exercise on that. And let's do another exercise on what is the likely implication of this on the audit. Is that true to highlight these two areas as the weaker areas of the student? Right? So pick an issue. All of you can do that, right? But why it is wrong? Some might do it, some might not. And what is the likely implication of this on the audit? Some might do it, some might not do it in the exam hall. So I need to focus on these two areas as something important. But is it something the student community has taken a stress on their mind, that what are professional issues, what are quality control issues? Is it not a simplest definition you're getting to know today, that when you read a case on a professional and quality control issues, or even on an ethical issue, what is the bottom line? Try to find a problem from a case study. Are we concerned whether the problem is quality, whether the problem is professional, or are we concerned why it is a problem and what is the implication of the problem on the audit? Will that not make your life easier to identify problems from a case study only and focus on telling the examiner why it is a problem, what is the implication of the problem? Will that reduce the stress level? Because I think a lot of times the student having stress with this level is just because of one thing. They have a stress with this topic because they try to go after examples. What are professional issues? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. No, you cannot do that way. What are quality control issues? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Simply read a case study and judge in the case what is wrong. If something is wrong, then tell why it is wrong and what's the implication of the wrong on the audit. Is that not the simplest thing you can clear your mindset and attack a question? Right? So can we just do this quickly and start on with an exercise, because again that exercise will demonstrate what I'm trying to say exactly. Is it like this way? Let's do a sketching here. Okay, in the exam we have a case on ethical, professional, and quality control issues. I'm using the short form EPQ, ethical, professional, quality control. And you're reading a case in exam paper. Now, when you're reading this case in the exam paper, simply what you need to do is that in this case, try to identify the something which you believe is wrong. And perhaps this is what each student can do very easily. What is wrong? If you pick that, that means you've started the track of identifying the issue. Next is, now once you know this is wrong, then you have to do something where you need practice. You need to tell why it is wrong, and you need to tell what is the implication of this on the audit. Now, the more you practice, the better you could be on why and implication. The better you could be on why and implications. But can I conclude on something, that this is something which you can pick from the case, but something which needs practice is to write a why and implication? If you do 5 questions on this topic, will that problem mitigate? Will that problem reduce down writing why and implication, why and implication? Can you just skim over the examiner answers, not for the sake of the length of the examiner answer? Can you just skim over the examiner answer to see how he writes the why and implication? Can you underline the why and implication in the examiner answer rather than looking at the length of the examiner answer? So can the examiner answer be an inspiration for you here? Can you get inspiration from the examiner answer, underlining in the examiner answer why and implication? Don't see the length of the examiner answer, right? Don't see the length of the examiner answer. Just see how the examiner writes the why and implication. Underline that. Take a highlighter, take a printout, sit down, highlight in the examiner answer how he writes the why and implication, rather than looking at the length of the answer. Don't look at the length of the answer. Is that something you will do? over the next 15-20 days? Will that really help you getting on track with why and implications? And I am doing an exercise in the next 1 hour with you to show you why and implication, why and implication. Pick the track, and with that track, continue. Okay, let's start an exercise. So, are we concerned with what is a quality control issue and what is a professional issue, or are we concerned with what is wrong in the case study? Quick answers. Are we concerned with what is an ethical issue, what is a professional issue, what is a quality control issue, or are we simply concerned about what is wrong in the case study? So, has that reduced your stress level? Has that reduced your stress level? Okay, now let's do an exercise to see how much have you understood that. Okay, let's do a case which I have shared with you. The June 2018 exams right in front of your screen. I tried choosing a big question for the session today just to give you how you pick what is wrong. Now, when you read a question like such in an exam paper, which is as big as the question you're looking in front of you, and which is a very specific question on quality control problems in this case study, you go down and see what is the examiner asking you. And again, you will realize how many times we don't read the requirements carefully. It happens in exam paper that we answer half the question because we misunderstood the question. If you answer half the question, how will you gain 20 marks? You can only gain 20 marks if you answer full question. Let's see what is the examiner asking for 20 marks. Let's start doing the annotations. And I think you should realize these annotations are important. What's the reason of doing this in the session? Will you do this in the exam hall the way I'm doing it on the screen for you? You go to the exam hall and you bracket the requirements, and when you bracket the requirements, see how am I reading the requirements. Suppose I am a student sitting in an exam hall, and right in front of your screen you can see how am I doing the annotation. Okay, I'll start reading the question, and the question says, just 1 minute. The question says, evaluate the quality control issues. Okay, the examiner first want me to evaluate the issue. That means I need to find something wrong in the case study. I need to find something wrong in the case study. Right? Is that true? Okay, next. Then the examiner says, tell me the implication of that issue. What's the implication of the issue on the audit? So is that exactly what I just told you? That when you find an issue which you think is wrong in the question, then you have to tell wrong why. You have to tell wrong why, and then you have to tell another very important thing, wrong why, and wrong its implication. Wrong and its implication. How many marks will I get for the issue why and implication? No, just 1 mark. The issue and its implication is 1 mark, right? When you tell an issue and you tell why it is an issue, that's 1 mark, right? So issue and the implication, 1 mark. Then can you see the examiner telling us in the next line, including any further actions? So should I be focusing on writing some actions in my answer as well? Can you see this word actions? Is that another requirement of the question? Actions. So should I treat this as something important? Again, how many marks will I get for action? 1 mark. Which should be taken by your audit firm? your answer should include the methods to be communicated to management. So is the examiner asking yet another thing from me, that your answer should include methods to be communicated. To whom are we communicating these methods? To the management or those charged with governance. So if there is a problem in a case study, which I think is a weakness in the internal control system, what we communicate to the management, we communicate to the management any problems in the company, right? Is that true? We communicate to the management the problems within the company, weaknesses in the company, weaknesses in the internal control system. So when the examiner asks me what you should include the methods to be communicated, I'll say, okay, the methods to be communicated are basically the weaknesses. So should I also be finding the weaknesses in the question? Weaknesses of the auditor or weaknesses in the internal control system of the company? Weaknesses in the internal control system of the company. So should I be finding the internal control system weaknesses in this question? Internal control system. How many marks will I get for communicating matters? One. One for action, one for communicating, one for issue and its implication. Now see, have you understood the requirements? And how many times we do this much reading of requirement in exam paper? I don't believe so. Okay, a student spends so much time on reading the requirement in the exam paper and doing all what you just saw on the screen. How many of you honestly tell me do this, circling marks, circling, understanding what to do? I simply believe you just read the requirement, you even don't do any annotations on the requirement, and you jump to the case study. Honestly tell me, do you do such annotations of requirements in the exam paper? And have you realized the importance of doing that? Have you realized the importance of doing that? Will you do this? Will it improve the quality of the answer? Will it improve the quality of the answer? Okay, that's great. Okay, now let's go back to the Word file and start the drilling of this question, right? Which question are we doing? We are doing the June 2018 question. For the sake of your uh, reduction in the stress level on quality control and professional issues. So let's start the exercise on this. June 2018, question number 3, and you go down and see how to go about it. How many things the examiner is asking in the requirements? Let's recap that. Number 1, examiner is asking us to identify the issue, whatever the issue is, plus the implication of the issue. Issue and the implication is equal to 1 mark. Then the examiner is asking us to write actions. Actions is equal to 1 mark. And then the examiner is asking us to communicate methods to management and those charged with governance. And for every communication, I will get 1 mark. And which methods are we communicating to the management and those charged with governance? The weaknesses, the weaknesses in the internal control system, right? So have I structured the answer for you? The requirement, sorry. Please do that in exam paper. It will hardly take 3 to 4 minutes, but these 3 to 4 minutes can do wonders on the answer you're writing. I even mentioned that yesterday. 1/4 of the time should be spent on planning. 1/4 time, internal control system, ICS, 1/4 time should be spent on planning. Okay, is the structure ready? Now let's see what's the question. When I look at the question, June 2018, how many problems are there in the question? Can you see 1, 2, 3, 4? Are there 4 problems in the question? Yes, that's perfect. If you do this answering plan on the answer paper, you show evidence to examiner that you did planning. That's wonderful. So you can do this planning on your answer booklet. So there is an evidence of planning on your answer booklet, and then once you complete planning, when you complete planning, start the answer from the next page. Okay, can you see four issues in this question? One, two, three, four. And can you see the separate marks allocated for each of the four issues? Issue number one has 4 marks. Issue number two has 6 marks. Then you go down. Issue number three has another 6 marks. And then the final issue, issue number four, has 4 marks. So we have four issues with 4, 6, 6, 4. So let's go back the Word file, and now let's see the structured down answer here. Okay, I have the issue 1 in exam, then I have an issue 2 in exam, then I have an issue 3 in exam, and I have an issue 4 in exams. I exactly know how many marks I have to gain from these 4 issues. From the issue number 1, I need to gain in 4 marks. From the issue number 2, I need to gain in 6 marks. From the issue number 3, I need to gain another 6 marks. And from the issue 4, I need to gain in the 4 marks. For every issue, how many things I have to do? For every issue, how many things I have to do? Answers 3. For every issue, I have to do how many things? 3. Can you see the 3 things in front of your screen highlighted in yellow? Are these the 3 things I have to do for every issue? Issue and the implication, action and communicate matters to management, right? So for every issue, I have to think about the issue plus the implication. For every issue, I need to think about the actions, and for every issue, I need to think about what to communicate to management. So is that clear with everyone now? Let's start the first case. Now, what are we picking from the question? Are we picking what is wrong in the question first? Is that true? Right, so combined, so can we read the case first? What are we picking from the case? What's wrong? Let's do that drill. Okay, your first test now, right? I hope you pass in this first test to pick what's wrong here rather than being concerned about quality, professional, quality, professional. Okay, let's go down. I'm reading the first point. The planned audit approach to trade payables was to place reliance on purchasing controls and keep substantive tests to minimum. Okay, when you went for the audit, you had an approach that you will do more test of controls and less substantive procedures, right? So that's wonderful. Now let's see what was the problem when you approach during controls, when you were doing the test of controls, right? During controls on trade payables, from a random statistical sample, the audit team identified 3 purchase orders which had not been authorized by the procurement manager. So, see this point here. Did we identify the deficiency in the internal control system from our random statistical sample? Did we identify the deficiency in the internal control system when we were doing a random sample? So should I go back to my file and should I communicate this matter to the management? That the purchase orders were not authorized by the manager. Should I inform this that the purchase orders were not authorized by the manager to the management? Is that true? Now see what the examiner is telling you. Examiner is telling you that when you communicate something to the management, see the criticism of the examiner. The criticism of the examiner is right here. This is the examiner report of the same question we are doing currently in the session. In this examiner report, the examiner tells, can you see the blue box? I'm reading under the blue box, right? The question also asked for matters to be communicated to management and those charged with governance to be included, and this was not answered well. Examiner is saying students didn't answer this well. Candidates need to ensure they can explain clearly what needs to be communicated. So what is the examiner saying? Candidates can explain clearly. Candidates can explain clearly what needs to be communicated. So have we identified from the question what needs to be communicated? Have we identified from the question what needs to be communicated? That the purchase orders were not authorized, right? Why it needs to be communicated and to whom? Then the examiner is saying you also need to tell why it needs to be communicated and to whom. Have you ever read examiner reports of questions you solve? So have we identified a deficiency in the internal control system that the purchase orders were not authorized? And should we inform the management that the purchase orders were not authorized? But the examiner is saying you also need to tell why it needs to be communicated and to whom. So let's make the definition of the examiner. Examiner is saying that in an exam paper, when you communicate matter to management, you need to tell three things. Number one, what needs to be communicated. Obviously, the case will guide you. Then the examiner says you need to tell why it needs to be communicated, why it needs to be communicated. And then the examiner says you need to tell to whom. Have you ever thought about that when you communicate a matter to management, and this question has come so many times in past paper, have you realized the breakdown of this ABC? What needs to be communicated? You will identify that from the case. Why it needs to be communicated? How many times you didn't answer this? Why it needs to be communicated? And to whom? This is a question to all of you. Examiner reports. Examiner reports. You keep failing the AAA paper because you're not reading examiner reports. Is the examiner telling in the report how you solve the requirements? And we never bother to read them. Where did I got this ABC from? I got this ABC from the examiner report. See, if you only tell what needs to be communicated and you come happy out of the exam hall, are you getting the full 1 mark? But if you tell what, why, and to whom, are you getting the full 1 mark? So have you realized the importance of examiner reports, and will you be reading them in the next 1 month you have before exams? Okay, let's see. That the purchase order were not authorized by the manager. This should be communicated. This should be communicated because it is a deficiency. It is a deficiency which can result in unauthorized purchases. Unauthorized purchases. It can result in unauthorized purchases and misuse of company's resources. So should I be telling management that the reason why I am telling you this problem is that this can result into unauthorized purchasings in the company, and which can be misuse of the company's resources? The company might be buying something which is not the need. So is that the basically why it needs to be communicated? The company might be buying something which is not needed. So have I got my one full mark here that I should be communicating it to the management? Okay, let's go back to the case. Okay, now let's tell me the problem. The audit team identified 3 purchase orders which has not been authorized by the procurement manager. So far the audit team is going on the right track. They identified the problem. On review of the supporting documentation, the audit team concluded that the items were legitimate business purchases and therefore concluded that no additional procedures were required. Have you identified what's wrong here? Have you identified the issue? On the review of the supporting documentation, the audit team concluded that the items were legitimate business purchases and therefore concluded that no additional procedures were required. I hope you all understand that when you identify a problem in a sample, the very first thing you should do is that you increase your sample size. And when you find a problem in a sample, you should increase your substantive testings. When you find a problem in a sample, you should extrapolate the problem in a sample to a population. Have we done that? We found a problem and we are concluding that no additional procedures were required. So is the conclusion right or wrong? Is the auditor conclusion right or wrong? So is that the problem I need to highlight for examiner? So let's take back the word file. Now have I found the issue? There was a wrong conclusion by the audit team. There was a wrong conclusion by the audit team because they should had increased the sample size and extent of the substantive procedures when they knew there are problems in internal control systems. So wrong conclusion by the audit team. Why? Because they should have increased the sample size and the extent of the substantive procedures when they knew there were problems in the internal control system. So issue and the implication. Have I tell examiner why it is an issue? Because they should have increased the sample size and extent of substantive procedures when they knew there are problems in the ICS. Now what's the implication? Have they performed sufficient work? Have they performed adequate work? Have they performed adequate work on purchasings? So is that the implication? Have they gathered sufficient evidence on purchasings? So after the full stop, I'll tell thus inadequate work was performed on purchases and the auditor didn't gather adequate evidence. The auditor didn't gather adequate evidence. Full stop. So what's the issue? Do you all, please, I need your quick answers. What is this the issue? Wrong conclusion. Wrong conclusion is the issue, right? Then can you see because is the why, and then can you see the implication coming in the last 1.5 lines? Let's use a blue highlighter here. Can you see the segregation of my bullet? Wrong conclusion. Why a wrong conclusion? And what's the implication of the wrong conclusion on the evidence gathered on purchases? A very specific area. What action should I take? Should I increase my sample size? The problem, right? What is the solution of this problem? Should I increase substantive testings as my action? Increase substantive testing to resolve the problem, or increase the sample size? Is that the solution of the problem? Right? So are you finding how we structured the 4-mark answer here? So are you getting something from the first issue? Pick what is wrong, tell examiner why it is wrong, and then tell examiner what's the implication of the wrong. If you think there is a deficiency in the internal control system, that then you need to communicate that to management. Then you need to tell examiner why you need to communicate to management and to whom. And the last thing is you need to write an action to overcome the problem. Let's do the second one so that you learn this. Can you see the second problem for 6 marks? Let's use a different color here so that you can track the problem. Can you see the second problem now in blue? Let's do the same thing on this. How many things we have to do for the second problem? A quick recap. How many things we need to do for 6 marks? Number 1, we need to tell the issue and the implication. Number 2, we need to tell the actions. Number 3, we need to tell the matters to be communicated to management. Let's start reading it. Following a review of the petty cash transactions, the audit assistant identified that the petty cashier paid for taxi fare for personal non-business journey with a total value of $175. Is it something like misuse of the resources of the company that the petty cashier is using the petty cash for the personal expenditures? Is it like a small scale fraud happening in a company? Do you agree this is a small scale fraud? Because the person is using the petty cash for his personal expenditures. Can we use petty cash for our own personal expenditures? So is the petty cashier doing something wrong? Is he doing a fraudulent activity? Should we inform this to the management? Can a small scale fraud become a big fraud later? So should I address the fraud when it is small, or should I address the fraud when it becomes big? So should I inform this problem to the management that there is a petty cashier who is using the petty cash for the personal business journey? So can we write this point under this heading? Issue number 2, the petty cashier using the petty cash for his personal expenses should be communicated to the management, because is it important to write because? Does the examiner wants because It is a fraudulent activity. It is a fraudulent act. It is a fraudulent act as the petty cashier is misusing as the petty cashier is misusing the company's resources, as the petty cashier is misusing um, the company's resources for his personal expenses. Right? So try to do the question in the order. Whatever comes first, do it. Interestingly, in both the questions we have done so far, the very first thing is the weakness in the internal control system. So should I write in the exam paper whatever comes first? So the very first thing I get to know from the question was that the petty cashier was using the petty cash for his personal expenses. So should I be communicating this problem to the management and gaining my marks from here? Okay, let's go down with the second one. Following discussion with the audit assistant, you have ascertained that he did not report the matter further as the amount is immaterial. Do you agree with what the audit assistant did? Did the audit assistant did something right or wrong? So have you picked the wrong thing? So if you pick a wrong thing, then what we need to tell? If you pick a wrong thing in the exam paper, then what we need to tell of the wrong thing? Its implication. So the audit assistant did not report. The audit assistant did not report the matter further as the amount is immaterial. Is it a fraudulent activity? Even though of a small amount? Should we inform the fraudulent activities to management irrespective of the amounts, because these fraudulent activities then can become bigger? So let's strike that as the next point. The audit assistant didn't inform the act of the petty cashier, didn't inform the act of the petty cashier to anyone. This is The audit assistant didn't inform the act of the petty cashier to anyone when he should had at least inform this firstly to his manager, and then the manager should had communicated this to the management. Can the audit assistant directly communicate to the management there is a fraud happening in a company? Right? So the audit assistant didn't inform the act of the petty cashier to anyone when he should had at least informed this firstly to his manager, and then the manager should had communicated this to the management. So can the assistant directly communicate something to the management like a fraud, or should he first bring that to the knowledge of his manager? So can you understand the para two? So when he should have communicated first to the manager and then to this, right? Because he didn't informed this to anyone, the management the management and the audit manager is unaware of such a situation happening in the company. So is that the implication, that no one in the management and no one in the audit team is aware of this problem happening in a company? Right? So the final problem now. The audit assistant also commented that the petty cashier is his brother and he did not want to get him in trouble. Is that something wrong again? That the petty cashier was his brother? Is that an ethical dilemma? Is there a familiarity thread between the audit assistant and the petty cashier? So should we mention that as well? Further, there is a familiarity thread. There is a familiarity thread between the audit assistant and the petty cashier due to close family relationship, due to a close family relationship. This must have compromised the objectivity of the audit assistant performing work on petty cash. This must have compromised the objectivity of the audit assistant performing work on the petty cash and had distracted him not to report this matter to anyone. Right? So we're thinking about the implication on the audit process, right? We're not thinking about the implication on the financial statement. We're not doing a risk question, right? We are basically doing the implication for the process of the audit. So have we got another issue, familiarity? And this has distracted the audit assistant not to communicate the matter to anyone, right? Now think about the action. When you're writing in the action, think about how did the audit, I'm raising a question to you, you need to respond to me, right? How did the audit assistant allocated to audit team when his brother was working in the company? Who is to blame? The firm policies, the firm ethical policies. Whenever we depute the team, it is the responsibility of the engagement partner to ensure that the team is independent of the client. This is a fundamental breach of the firm policies. That means the firm is not monitoring the ethical dilemma when they are assigning the team for the audit. So how did the assistant become part of the team? How did the assistant was part of the audit team? He should not have been part of the audit team. So where is the problem? The problem is that when you write an action, you will write the action this way. The audit firm needs to ensure that their independence review is thorough, and is monitored prior to assigning team for the audit. Should the audit firm do this for future, that the audit firm needs to ensure that their independence review is thorough and is monitored prior to assigning the team for the audit? Else the same problems can come the next year. They can even take declarations. That's wonderful, right? They can even take declarations from the staff that no one is working in the company. That means such things were not taken when this assistant was deputed to the client. Now, be very realistic. Just read here something in the first paragraph. Can you read in the first paragraph that this is a listed company and a significant new client of a firm? Now imagine, it was a new client, so we should had reviewed the independence very carefully. That means the partner has not considered independence of the team, which was so very important because it was not a recurring audit. It was a new client. Do you realize the importance of this line? It was a new client, so the partner should have ensured that when the partner is deputing the team, the partner should have assured that none of the member in the team had any familiarity issues. So is that line important? It's a new client. Do you all realize the importance of the new client in the line there? And do you all realize the importance? It was a listed company where we should have been more concerned. And then see the last thing. Can you see this line over here? The audit report is due to be signed next week. Now, because many of the students are telling me we should change the audit assistant. Is it a right time to change the audit assistant when the report is to be signed next week? He has already done work, right? He has already done work. You are standing at the stage of completing the audit. Is it a right time to change the auditor when the audit has got completed or is about to get completed? So can we write this as an action that we should change the audit assistant? So do you realize the importance of reading the first paragraph here? Rather than we just write a rote learn procedure or an action in the exam paper, because of the familiarity threat, the audit assistant should be changed. Will you get reward for that? Because the question is telling you the audit report is to be signed next week. So is it something appropriate to change the assistant now? Not at all. Yes, we can at least assure that we can have a review of the petty cash working papers. We can assure that next time this mistake should not repeat. And when we come for the next year audit, this audit assistant is not part of the team. We can replace him for the future, right? We cannot replace him for the present. We can replace him for the future. So did you realize the importance of the first paragraph, all of you? Did you realize the first paragraph is telling us that the report is to be signed next week? So do you all need to realize reading the first paragraph? So when the report is to be signed after a week, can you think realistically in the exam paper what action can be taken and what action cannot be taken? And was it a new client? And for a new client, should we be more concerned? Should we be more concerned for a new client? So try to relate that with a case study, right? So let's do a final recap here. Again, you go down. There is an issue number 3. Then there is an issue number 4. For every issue, you can see my answers which have been shared, but I'll prefer you do it first yourself, that you pick up an issue and justify what is wrong, and the implication of that. Then try to identify from the case study, what should I communicate to the management and why should I communicate to the management? And then try to pick from the case study, what action should I be taking in the context of the case study? Have you realized something from the first and the second issues I performed in front of you in the live session? Will you continue that on the 3 and 4 issue? But have you picked the track? Okay, let's just do one thing to assure that we are on the right track. Okay, now I need your focus and I'll be asking questions from you. You need to respond with me. When you look at an issue in the exam paper, right, the very first time you would think about the issue from the case and you will tell why. You will pick something wrong from the case and you will then tell what is the implication of this wrong on the audit process. Did you found something wrong? One wrong was that we didn't increase the sample size, even though we got to know that there was weak controls. There were weak controls, but we didn't increase the sample size. That was something wrong. Then in the second situation, did we got something wrong? That the audit assistant didn't inform the fraud to anyone. So you need to pick what is wrong from the case and what's the implication of the wrong on the audit process. Then you need to identify from the case what actions should be taken. But when you are writing the action, be very careful to read the introductory paragraph. What action should be taken? Be very careful to read the introductory paragraph, because in the introductory paragraph you might get some examples like the report is to be signed next week, or the introductory paragraph can tell you about it is a listed company. The introductory paragraph can tell you about it's a new client. So the introductory paragraph cannot be skipped when you're writing the actions. Carefully read the introductory paragraph to write the actions. And then think about, what should I communicate to the management? And when you think about what you should be communicating to the management, the examiner is saying, also tell why you should communicate, and to whom. Why you should communicate and to whom. Right? So are you getting the structure of the requirement clear? Can you understand the requirement now? Exactly what the examiner is asking for in a requirement like such? And when you know the requirement, will it help you to better absorb the case study? Can you better absorb the case study when you know the requirements? And if you don't know the requirements, you don't understand the requirement, can you absorb the case study? Never. Okay, just one last thing. When you communicate to management, There are two levels of management, right? Level 1 is management. There are two levels of management, right? One is known as management and one is known as those charged with governance. You cannot communicate everything to those charged with governance. Some things are communicated to management, some things are communicated to those charged with governance. Let's realize that. I take you back to the examiner report, and in the examiner report, you can read this. Can you read this paragraph in front of your screen? I'm reading this for you. This is from the June 18 examiner report. Examiner says, as mentioned above, candidates were not good at differentiating between reporting matters to management and those charged with governance, and often confuse the different roles of the two groups. So is the examiner telling us that we should be bifurcating between those charged with governance and management, because he's saying that the students were not good in differentiating between reporting matters to management and those charged with governance and often confuse the roles of the two groups? Then the examiner gives you an example. Management runs the business day to day and are responsible for the design and operations of control. So management is responsible for the design and operation of the control, and they run the day-to-day business. Whereas those charged with governance are often independent of day-to-day activities and are responsible for overall strategic framework of controls and management of the audit. So is the examiner bifurcating between the management running the day-to-day business and those charged with governance are independent of the day-to-day activities and are responsible for setting the overall strategic framework of controls and management of the audit? Now, give me a quick answer. We're just moving into the last few minutes of the session. We had the issue relating to number one issue, that was purchase orders were not authorized. We had the second issue where the petty cash was used for personal expenses. These two issues are not the issues which should go to those charged with governance. These should first go to management, because management is responsible for the operations of controls, design and operation of controls. So when you think there is a weak internal control, you should inform the problems first to the management. If the management fails to address them, then you can inform to those charged with governance. The management is the middle management, right? Management is the middle management, and those charged with governance are basically the board of directors and the audit committee. So a lot of student even does not know the definition of this. Board of directors plus the audit committee is part of this, and the management basically is the middle management of a company which is responsible for the operations of the control. So purchase orders are not authorized and petty cash was used for personal expenses. This is a problem which should first go to the management, because these relates with weak internal controls, right? Now you look at the third issue in the exam paper. Come back to the June 18 question. See the third issue. The third issue is a problem relating to IFRS 15. Revenue was recorded early. There was a cutoff problem. On revenue. The revenue was recorded early, so on and so forth. Now, is that a very major problem, that the company does not have the proper accounting policies? Revenue is recorded wrongly. Is that a matter which should go to the attention of the finance director? Should I inform the finance director that the accounting policy in line with IFRS 15 is not adequate. So purchase order is not authorized, I can inform the management. Petty cash used for personal expenses, I can inform the management. But IFRS 15 is such an important issue which I should address the finance director, because finance director is ultimately responsible to have an oversight of the financial statement. So should I inform the finance director that there is a cutoff problem in revenue and the revenue can be overstated? So issue number 3 in this exam paper, which relates with IFRS 15 and which relates with the cutoff problems, in revenue, is a very significant issue, right? We should go to those charged with governance because it affects the financial statement. It affects the overstatement of the revenue and overstatement of the profit. So does it have a direct connection with the financial statement? Were these issues directly connected with the financial statement and the financial statement being overstated? So can I report such issues to those charged with governance, which have a direct impact on financial statements and the financial statements becoming overstated or understated? But the issues like the first one, I can, because it does not directly connect with financial statement, I can go down with management. Petty cash, I can go down with management. So just into the last 4 minutes, right? Have you realized the importance of reading the examiner report? Because the examiner told us that how we should communicate the matter to matters to management and those charged with governance. Was the examiner report important to identify that there are two levels of management and those charged with governance? And did the examiner provided you a definition of both levels? So can you learn a lot from examiner report? Uh, can you relate that the solution to your problem lies in reading the examiner report? Have you realized that? So have you realized that most of the time our problem lies the solution of our problem lies in reading the examiner reports? Please make that a habit. Please make that a habit of reading the examiner reports, because they can really open your eyes about what we do wrong in exam paper. And the examiner reports are so good that they really educate you. They really educate you on certain fundamentals, and those fundamentals can really do wonder in your exam paper. Right. So within the limitation of the time today, we focus today on ethical issues and we focus today on professional and quality control issue. Again, the bottom line is that from a question, you need to identify the problem, and from the question, you need to tell examiner why it is a problem, and then you need to think about the implication of the problem on the audit process. I hope the techniques which were guided today in the session will really help you down with your exams in June. If I can have a quick feedback of the session today, in terms of your overall feedback of the session today, and in terms of what you learned from the session today, what had been the key learnings of the session today, and did this session really help you down with identifying the problems and solutions of your problems? Because you can access my previous webinars, right? Because in my previous webinars, in each of them, I have done this topic. So you can go down with my previous webinars and see other questions and the way other questions were solved in the previous webinars. I try to assure that in this webinar, we do something different and we try to learn something different. So I hope the session had been productive today. You must have got something out of these 3 hours of live session in which you participated in. So please make a habit of reading examiner reports, make a habit of reading examiner articles, make a habit of reading the requirements, and so that you can do a very good answer in exam paper. Now we're meeting tomorrow for the fourth day, which is about other assignments, and I'll be focusing on other assignments tomorrow, which is yet another very important topic. So we will be live tomorrow, 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. the Pakistan Standard Time, for the day 4 of the AAA Practice to Pass session being organized by ACCA Pakistan. I am Kashif Kamran signing off from day 3, and if you have any questions unaddressed, please, the WhatsApp group is there for you to facilitate you and your questions. Okay, have a nice day. I'll see you tomorrow in the live session. Goodbye and Allah Hafiz.